All right, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on this wonderful Monday evening, and we see that even Yaakov managed to join us from a wedding. Good for you, Yaakov. I remember that in my shul, I would always give shir by shul weddings. I would give the shir right after the chuppah. As a matter of fact, I did it even by my own children's weddings. They worked the photography around me that I should be able to say the shir and then come in quickly for the pictures. Okay, we are sponsored by the Fogel family. Lila Nishmas Yaakov Zeb ben Yodaya, Rivka Bas Yaakov Yosef, Tzivya Miriam Bas God, Yosef ben Tzim Yaakov Zev, Lefu Shalem for Moshe Aya ben Miriam, for a great shidduch for Chayat Tzivya Bas Shoshana Gittel, a great shidduch for Bati Bas Sarah, by Baruch Ian, Lila Nishmas Yaakov Chaim ben Abba, Esther Bas Yona, Avram ben Shmuel Akain, Lefu Shalem for Liba Bas Anya, Lefu Shalem for Yosef Shmuel ben Miriam, for Ariel, and her sister, Basel Zarifka, that they should have a healthy mommy and healthy baby. Learn from Shalom Dov ben Pesha, Meshmei ben Esther Fadel. They should have a refuah shalema b'seich shachel Yisrael. Okay, we are holding at the bottom line of Daf Ayin Amud Beis. The bottom line of Daf Ayin Amud Beis. Amalei Rabbi Elazar, the Rabbi Yoshia. Now, there are different Rabbi Yoshias. This is Rabbi Yoshia Didore. The Rashi says that the reason why it says Rabbi Yoshia of his generation, this is to differentiate from Rabbi Yoshia Hagadol, who was a Tana. So he said to Rabbi Yoshia, Leitese vakarech, they used to fold back their knees and sit on their knees. So lo teise vakarech, don't sit on your knees, ad mifreshle laha masnisen, until you explain this to me. Minayin la'omer shematir ba'ashrasha. How do you know that the omer permits that which took root in the ground, even if it wasn't harvested? Says the Gemara, Minalan, how do you know? The chsiv aviv, because it says, what do you use as the carbon aviv? You use ripe crops. Lav mechlal diikid, the lav aviv, that there's also available that which is not ripe, which means that it covers even that which is not harvested. Says the Gemara, no. Who says it means that it just took root? Maybe the lav aviv, maybe it's not fully ripe, but l'olam the ayil shlish, it only permits it if it already grew a third. Ela'amar Shmuel mehachel chemish, that which you start taking the sickle to. La mechlal di'ikad the la bar chemish, that you can't take the sickle to, that it only took root. Says the Gemara, but maybe the la bar chemish you can't. It's not tall enough to use a sickle, but a la'olam shachas, but it's at least a little bit from the ground that you could use it as animal fodder. Amar Reb Yitzchak, so Reb Yitzchak says, kama, that which is standing. Lav michlal the lav bar kama. Doesn't that include that there are things that are not standing, in other words, just in the ground, taking root? It says, well, maybe the lav bar kama, ula oilam agam, but it has to be something that can at least bend in the ground, not that it's just taking root. Ela amar Rava asher tizra. It says in the pasuk, the correct pronunciation is Asher Tizra, that which is planted, teaching you that clearly Mishas Zriya, that the Eimer permits it as soon as it's planted. Says the Gemara, maybe then it's even if it didn't take root. Maybe even if it didn't take root, as soon as it's planted, the Eimer is materit. So Rav Chisda here, Rava here, takes a great one to know one. Rava here addresses Rav Papa with the honorific Sodani. Sodani means the one who was a bearer of secrets. Sod Hashem liYireya. Rav Papa was a great Talmud Chacham. Sodani, B'sadek Siv. It says that which is in the ground. It had to have already become one with the ground, meaning that it already took root. Now, says the Mishnah, Kaitzrin Beis HaShlachim Sheba Amokim. You could harvest before the Eimer the irrigated fields in the valleys. You see, you could harvest that which is not fit for the Eimer itself. That which grows in irrigated fields is inferior barley, and since it's not fit for the Eimer, you could harvest it before the Eimer. But we don't allow you to stack it because we're afraid you might pop it into your mouth. Anshe Yericha Kaitzrin B'Ritzayin Chacham. Anshe Yericha would harvest with the consent of the Chachamim, but V'Gaitchin, they would stack it Shaloi B'Ritzayin Chachamim without the consent, but since it's not biblically prohibited, V'Loi Michu B'Yodem, they didn't actively protest. The sages didn't protest. Kaitzel L'Shachas, you could harvest, the only harvesting that's forbidden is harvesting for human eating. Kaitzel L'Shachas, but before the Eimer you could harvest it when it's very, very young. Machal L'Behema, to feed it to your animals. Amar Rav Yaisi, Eimasai, Bizman Shemaschal Ad Shaloi Evi Shlish. If you started harvesting before it grew a third for your animals, then you could continue even after it grows a third before the Eimer. Reb Shimon says, if you're doing it for your animal, Yiktzar V'Yachal, you could harvest it and feed it to your animals even before the Eimer, Af Meshei V'Shlish, even after it grows a third. Now, V'Kaitzim Mitmei Netias, again, crops that grow amongst trees are weakened because they're weakened by the trees, therefore they're not fit for the Eimer, so you're allowed to harvest it. And also, you're allowed to harvest it because it's in order that the trees shouldn't suffer a loss, because the unwanted crop saps the more expensive nutrients from the trees. You're also allowed to harvest mipnei beis ha'avel. If somebody died, and there's a huge crowd, and they can't fit in the house, and you need to make a clearing in order that the comforters should be able to sit. So you're allowed to harvest to make room for the mourners, for the comforters. Or if, let's say, there's a visiting group of scholars and there's no room in the Beis HaMedrash, you could make a clearing and you could harvest to make a place to sit for learning. However, since you're only allowed to do it in order to make room, Lo yasa isan krichas, you're not allowed to bundle up that which you harvest. Ava manichem tzvasim, you leave them in piles. Now, mitzvah sa'amr lava min hakama. Of course, the preferable mitzvah is to bring it from standing grain, which you harvest. Loi matzah, if you don't find standing grain, then yavi min amarim, you could bring it from piles. Mitzvah sa'lava min alach, the mitzvah is to bring it from moist, fresh crops. Loi matzah, if you don't find it, yavi yavish, you could bring it from dry. Mitzvah liksa b'layla, the mitzvah is to harvest it the night of the 16th. Niksa b'yayim, but if you harvest it in the day, kosher. V'doicha es ha-Shabbos, and the mitzvah of harvesting the Eimer supersedes the Shabbos. Now, we have what looks like a stira in Psukim. Tanya, Rabbi Yamin Eimer, kosav echad Eimer, ukitzartem es kitzira. You harvest. That implies that you could harvests before, and then ve'heveisem es aimer, and then you get around to bringing the aimer. But another pasuk says v'ksiv reishis ketzir chamel hakayin, that the first harvest has to be for the kayin, for the aimer. So which one is it? So the Gemara says, like we explained, haketzat mimakom she'ata mevi, if it's a field that's fit for the aimer, you can't harvest until you bring the aimer. Like a tree, like an irrigated field in the valleys, or a crop that grows in a tree field, there atakaitzer. Says the Gemara, how do you know that that's pshat? Maybe the pshat is ema mimin she'ata mevi atakaitzer. You cannot harvest from barley, but mimin she'ata mevi. But from the other grains, wheat, spelt, oat, rye, atakaitzer. Says the Gemara, how like matzis amit Rabbi Yochanan? Because remember, Rabbi Yochanan learned it out from challah, just like challah is by all 5 species of grain. So the mitzvah of aimer is by all 5 species of grain as well. Okay, just getting underway over here on a beautiful Monday evening with such a nice olam, even though it's right before Pesach, as we welcome in Saba and Mel Zachter, Mark Frankel, Menachem Umansky, Irving Fishbaum, Yaakov Warman, who shows that even when you buy a wedding, you could still keep your Seder, Mo Kushner, Yisrael Fisher, Baruch Ian, Yitzi Fuchs, Michael, Ruven Pollack, Shalom Fogel, Nachman Chapler, Shlomi Schmidt, it's good to have you, Shlomi. When you're missing, we miss you. Itchy Weintraub, Dr. Black, Rabbi Knell, it's good to have you as well. Stephen Holtzman, Gabriel Epstein, Danny Vogel, Shimon Klein, Avram Rezepkowitz, Rabbi Elia Yaffe, Ilya Shutman, Yitzi Muller, Shelley Zeitlin, Richard Rosenzweig, David Helfgott. Here in Shul, we have Berish Gesseman, and Chaim Kramer, Michal Avram Chavin, Iran, and Ruvain Shanit joining us. Now, Anshe Yerichai, the townspeople of Yerichai, Kaitzrin B'Ritzayin Chachamim, would harvest with the approval of the sages before the Eimer, V'Gaitchin Shalai B'Ritzayin Chachamim, but they would stack without the approval of the Chacham because they're afraid that they would pop it in their mouth before the Eimer. Now this language, man shomaslei, who holds in Shas, da'ama michu v'loi michu, that some things they protested and some things they don't protest? Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, does Rabbi Yehuda say that v'savar Rabbi Yehuda k'tzira da'anshi yerichai b'ritzayin chachamim havei, that the harvesting of Anshe Yericha was with the consent of the sages? We're going to see that we are going to learn directly not that way in the Brisa. But Tanya, Shisha Dvarim Osu Anshe Yericha, 6 practices were practiced by the townspeople of Yericha. Shloisha B'Ritzayin Chacham, 3 found favor in the eyes of the Chacham. Shloisha Shaloi B'Ritzayin Chacham, and 3 the rabbis did not like. Ve'elu Sheb'Ritzayin Chacham, Markiven de Kolim Kolayim. They would graft trees the entire day of Erev Pesach. Even though on Erev Pesach, the minig was not to do certain malacha, they held that grafting trees was not considered actual malacha, and therefore it was okay. The Korchen Eshma. Now, there is a very big question of what does Korchen Eshma mean. Some say that it means that they said Shema Yisrael, and right away they said Baruch Shem Kvod Malchusai without pausing. They didn't pause. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and then Baruch Shem. No, they went straight to Baruch. V'kaitzrin lifnei ha'aymer, and they would harvest before the aymer. This was all b'ritzayin chacham. Ve'elu shaloi b'ritzayin chacham. The following 3 practices the sages did not like. Goichin lifnei aimer, they would stack before the aimer. They didn't like that because you might pop it in your mouth. Umatirin gamzia shel hektish shel charb v'shel shikma. And they would permit the shoots, the branches of trees of hektish, of carob and sycamore. You see, people dedicated the carob and the sycamore, and hektish used the beams for the building. The twigs they didn't use, and therefore they felt that wasn't sanctified and it was permitted. However, the sages held that gedule hektish, that which grows from hektish is hektish, and you're not allowed to use it. Uports and pirtzais begagoiseyan ubeginoiseyan upardoiseyan. This sounds like a really nice thing. They would make openings in their gardens and their orchards that the aniyim in a time of famine could come into their property and without being embarrassed, without having to ask, and take the fruit that fell from the ground. Lahachal nesher la'aniyim, to allow them to take the fruit from the ground, b'shnei batzayos. Now they didn't like this because they were afraid that then the aniyim might climb up and pull off an apple, which of course in this is doraisa. B'shabbos b'yom tovim. Divrei Rameya. This is the version of Rameya. But remember, we're asking a kasha on Rabbi Yehuda. And remember, in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said that they allowed the kaitzrin, they allowed the harvesting before the Yomer. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda said, if this is things that the sages liked, why single out Anshe Yerichai? You koloi the moisin came. Everybody should do it. Why say the Anshe Yerichai? It should say everybody should do it. Ela elu ve'elu shaloi b'ritzayin chacham. Both sets were the sages frowned on. But Val Shloisha Michu B'Yadam, 3 they protested, they actively protested. Val Shloisha Lo Michu B'Yadam, they didn't protest. They didn't like it, but they didn't protest. The Elu Shaloi Michu B'Yadam, Markivan de Kolm Kolayim, that they could graft trees on Erev Pesach. The Korchan Shema, and they could wrap the Shema without pausing. The Kaitzrin V'Goichin L'fnei Ayim, and they harvested and stacked before the Ayim. Now, according to this version, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the sages didn't like it, just they didn't protest. But in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said that the sages were okay with the harvesting. That's the kasha. But we continue first the Braisa. The Elu Shemichu B'Yadam, the following that they did protest, the following 3 activities were more forbidden, and they actually protested. Matirin Gamzir Shel Hektish Shel Charb Shel Shikma. In Yericha, they permitted the use of the twigs of carob and sycamore that was dedicated to Hektish. They held it was forbidden because Gedule Hektish, that which grows from Hektish is Hektish. Or parts and pirtzas began saying, but part is saying, and they opened breaches in their gardens and orchards, Kedei Lahachal Nesher La'aniyim, that the poor could eat that which fell from the trees, b'shnei batzaris, in a time of famine, b'shabbos b'yom tovim. They protested on that as well, because they might go up and they might take off some of them of their own. The noisnen, and the next thing that they protested is they gave peya liyerek. They gave the matnas aniyim, the corner of the field, even for vegetables. Now you might say, bravo. They want to give extra to the aniyim. What's so bad? No. Peya is pata for maisa. But vegetables, there's no peya. Because one of the stipulations of peya is that it has to be something that has a kiyum, has a shelf life. And before refrigeration, vegetables didn't have a long shelf life. So therefore there's no peya. By giving peya, they're exempting it from maisa, which is no good. Umichu b'yadam. So here you see that Rabbi Yehuda says, Kaitzrin v'gaitchin, shaloi b'ritzayin chacham, but they weren't micha. But in our Mishnah he says that they're kaitzrin b'ritzayin chacham. Says the Gemara, l'tamech, according to you, if you count it, then kaitzrin v'gaitchin is going to make it 7 and not 6. Shisha, it wouldn't be 6. Shiva haba. Rather, we have to delete kaitzrin. Elasami mekan katsira, delete kaitzrin, and then it's no question at all. Now, I'm going to warn you ahead of time that the next Gemara is a little bit technical, a little bit intricate. By way of Hakdama, by way of preface, let me tell you that there's shachas, that's animal food that's very low from the ground. And then there's where it grow a third. That's also animal food, but that's already more significant. We're going to see that if Berish has a field, if in middle, normally on a field, he takes one portion of Peah, the corner of the field. But if in the middle of the field he has running a ravine, the ravine makes it into 2 fields, and then he has to do 2 Peahs. And it's going to tell us a lot of different things that will make his field into 2 fields, that he'll have to bring 2 Peahs instead of 1 Peah. Okay, now let's see the Gemara inside. Kaitzel shachas, you could harvest shachas, umachal behema, right? Because that's not considered a regular harvest, and that's not what's forbidden before the Eimer. Tanan Hasam, we learned in Masechtas Peah. Well, I remember teaching this here in the shul. That's in Zraim, and now we're already in Kachim. It's really amazing how much we covered here since the shul started. Already almost 2/3 of Shas. We already did 2/3 of Shas. Tanan Hasam, ve'elu mafsikin lepeah. The following will divide Beresh's field into 2 fields, that he would have to bring 2 corners and not 1 corner. Hanachal, either a river or a ravine, vashlulis, a pool created by rainwater, v'derech hayochid, a private road which is 4 amas, v'derech harabim, a public road which is 16 amas. Over there in Peah it says why it has to say both. V'shvil harabim, a public path which is not so formal, or shvil hayochid, a private path which is open both in the summer and winter. Akavua b'maysa chama b'maysa geshamim. Vabur, an area of the field which is left fallow, so it shouldn't burn out. Vanir, or a plowed area of the field. V'zera achar, or if he has a strip of a different type of, it's a field of grain, and he has a strip of cabbage. V'kaitzer l'shachas, and if he harvested it just for his animals, a strip, mafsik, that interrupts and makes the field into 2 fields. Now, it's only because of a kaitzel shachas. If he would have been harvested it regular, we would say that doesn't interrupt. It's just that he started harvesting the field, and it's 1 field. But if he's kaitzel shachas, that's a different type of harvest, and that interrupts. Divrei Rameir. The Chachamim, and the Chacham say that ain't a mafsik. That's not mafsik. Ele imkain, it's only mafsik if after he harvests it for shachas, he plows it. Now, Amar Rabba Babachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Reb Meir, B'shitas Reb Shimon Amra, Reb Meir, the Gemara assumes, is going according to the Shita of Reb Shimon, who holds that you're allowed to, before the Eimer, be kaitzer for shachas, even if it's a third. Even after it grows a third, that's still not considered a k'tir. Alma Kasavar, he holds, kol l'shachas, whatever is for animal fodder, even if it's already grows a third, lav k'tiri, that doesn't constitute a harvest. So Yosef Rabba v'ka'amala lahashmaitza. Rabba was sitting and said over this dictum. So Eisvei Rav Acha bar Huna l'Rava. This is getting very interesting.
Rabbi, is it possible just to explain this idea?
No, I'm not interrupting in the middle of. You're going to mess everybody up. Okay. Says the Gemara. So again, I'm sorry, Rabbi Say. Let's review. The Gemara says over here that the Gemara says over here that Rav Meir is of the opinion that anything that was harvested for an animal, even if it already grew a third, is not considered regular harvest, and therefore it's permitted before the Eimer. So Yosef Rabba, Rabba sat, and he was saying over this dictum. So Eisvei Rav Acha bar Rav Huna l'Rava. Let's say, getting back to Beresh's field, Ochlo Chagav, if a strip of the field was devoured by grasshoppers, Kirsamua Nemolim, or ravaged by ants, or Shivresuhu Aruach, or broken by the wind, Hakol Moedim, everybody agrees that the only time that strip will be considered a interruption, that he should have to bring two payers, only chorish mafsik, if he plows it, it's mafsik, loy chorish eina mafsik. Now, what does it mean, hakol moedim? In other words, unless he plowed it, what the ants did would be considered just the beginning of the harvest. It's an unfortunate harvest, but it's the beginning of the harvest. So, who's the hakol moedim? Everybody agrees. Man, Rav Meir, even Rav Meir who holds that harvesting the shachas is not considered a harvest, this would be considered the beginning of the harvest unless it was plowed. Now, if you'll say when Rav Meir says that what's not considered a harvest where it didn't grow a third, so then Brisa over here, when it's talking about the ants, it's talking about where it's more significant that it grew a third, and therefore the chorish in loy chorish loy, and it's talking about b'shehevi shlish where it grew a third. Eli amrit masnisin nami b'shehevi shlish, that Rav Meir holds that even if it grew a third, it's not considered a ktsira. Well, if it's not considered a ktsira when a human does it, it surely shouldn't be considered a ktsira when an ant does it, when a locust does it. Why should you need to have to plow it? Hashta ma'asim the ktsira was al yedei adam. Amar Meir lo yishma ktsira. It's not considered ktsira. Hacha lo kol shchein. And here, where it's done with an ant, with a locust, it surely shouldn't be a ktsira, and therefore it should be an interruption even if you didn't plow. Ella, you must be Rav Meir b'shitas Reb Yehuda Amra. Rav Meir holds like Reb Yehuda. The Amra emasai bizman shehiskal ad shelo yehevi shlish. That where do we say that it's not a ktsira? That's only if you started before it grew a third. Aval im hiskal ad shehevi shlish. But if you harvested when it grew a third, that's considered already a significant harvest, and it would be forbidden before the Yama. Awesome. Says the Gemara, yeah, but even Rabbi Yehuda, Ema de Shamas the Rabbi Yehuda, that it's allowed if you harvested it when it was young before for an animal, the behema. Does he say it's so if you did it for a human? If he held it's for a human too, then there would be three opinions in our Mishnah. And now I don't know what would have been so bad if there would be three opinions in the Mishnah. Rather, Rameir Taka holds that even if you harvest it, even if you harvest it for a human, when it's less than a third, it's not considered a ksira. Alaki Asr Abdimi Amar Rameir Amar Rameir B'Shitas Rabbi Kiva Rabbi Amar that afla adam lo havi ksira, that it's if you harvest it for even when it's young, even if you do it for a human, it's not a harvest. The Tanan Hamenamer Sada, if somebody makes his field polka dotted, he takes pockets, B'shaya by klochim lachim, and he leaves spots of moist stalks. Rabbi Kiva, I'm a peah l'kol echad ve'echad. So you see that if he pulls out the field young and leave even for a human, it's considered that it's considered that it has a it's not part of a ktsira, and therefore it makes each spot a different field. No, that's just starting of the harvesting, and it's all one field. When you do it when it's young, to toast the kernels. When it's fully grown, so you see that Rabbi Kiva holds that when you do it young, it's considered that it's not a katsira, and therefore it interrupts and makes you take payah from every island, even though you're doing it for a human. Says Gemara Ini, but can Rameir hold like Rabbi Kiva? He holds that even if you harvested it when it was whole, when it was finished, since that's not the regular way of harvesting, it makes each field separate and you chayv for each field. Now Rameir certainly doesn't say that. Rameir says it only by shachas. Says the Gemara, Savala kavase b'chada. He holds like Rabbi Kiva in one area, that it's considered at least, even if you do it for a human, when you do it when it's kloyis, when you do it when it's young, he doesn't hold. If you do it if you do it when it's whole, that's a regular ktsira. That will not interrupt the different islands and make it that you have to bring payah from each and every one. It really is a pleasure to have all of you here. This was a little bit of a piece of a hard Gemara. Again, reminder that if you want me to sell your chametz, just send me an email and I'll send you the stars so we could do it together. My email is rmmwsi@aol.com, Rabbi Moshe Meir Weiss, Staten Island @aol.com. Thank you very much for joining us and have a wonderful evening.